What are these properties of water? Okay. And what functions they do? Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Oh, wow. Very good. So, hey, Manju, why don't you log in and just check if everything is correct? Hello. Can you see it, guys?
Sir, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ dim ಆಯ್ತು.
ಅದೇ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದು ನಾನು ನಿಮಗೆ. ನಾನು ನಿಮಗೆ ಮೇಲ್ ಮೆಸೇಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೇನೆ. ಏನು ಡಿಮ್ ಆಯ್ತು?
ಸರ್ ಅದು ಕಲರ್ ಸರ್.
ಹೌದಾ? ಇದೆ ನನ್ನ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ಪೆನ್ ಕಣೆ ಅದು. Okay, let us see if I can go nearer. Let me write bigger. Okay, so we said that water has a high dielectric constant. You can see that it is a bipolar solvent, and then it has because of these two properties, we said that it has other properties like it has a high specific heat and a very high latent heat of vaporization. Okay. Now, can you tell me what is specific heat?
Sir, heat required for the change of the state of the material.
Okay. Anybody can make it better than what Gopal said?
Sir, it is the amount of heat required to change the substance of a 1 gram from 1 degree Celsius.
Very good. Okay, so it is the heat or energy that is required to raise the temperature by 1 degree centigrade. Heat of 1 gram of the substance. At what time? What temperature? At 20 degrees. If you keep that substance at 20 degrees centigrade and you make it as 1 degree centigrade, it actually requires 1 calorie of energy. It is very high for all sort of standards. Now, what is latent heat of vaporization? Go ahead. Others?
Sir, it is the amount of the heat required to change the from liquid to vapor.
Very good. So you convert from the liquid state to the vapor state. And what is the temperature at which the water becomes vapor? It's 100 degrees centigrade. So that means to say you need to provide that much of calories from 20, another 80 calories you have to give, isn't it? To make it 100 degrees and then evaporate. That's what you would think. But if you look at this, if you were to instantly convert 20 degrees centigrade 1 gram into its vapor, you require 642 calories of energy. There's a lot of energy that it takes. Now, what is happening because of these 3 or 4 very, very important properties of water? It has a number of functions. It acts as a solvent for most of the substances that you have in an organic solution, right? Therefore, we call it as a universal solvent. It is because of the bipolar, dielectric, or whatever it is. We said one more thing, that it helps in evaporative cooling. One of the most important functions of water is to cool the system. If I ask you in your exams, water's function is cooling, which property helps the water to perform this function? What would be your answer?
Latent heat of
Hey, I want all other people, Devendra, Gopal, and then others. Other than that, let me ask you this question. So, Dilip, Arun Kumar, Dilip, go ahead. Chandan. Go ahead. Try Mari Makla, please. One of the most important thing that I want is enthusiasm from your side. And I mean, 3 people are enough for me to generate enthusiasm, but that's not fair, isn't it? So many of you are 90 people are there. 87. Another 13 people are absent. Can we take the snapshot now? Okay. So what happens is that if I ask you a question, function of water is to keep the canopy cool. Which properties of water helps the molecule of water to perform this function?
So that is because of that third property, so that specific heat, sir, heat transfer property, sir.
Okay, very good. So what do you mean, Ankita? What do you mean by that?
Sir, since because it is easily is having the high specific heat property, sir. So it usually injects heats also and gives away heat also through evaporation, sir, very easily, sir.
Very good. So anybody wants to modify or suggest, but make it better or something?
Sir, evaporation. Sir.
Go ahead, Devendra.
Sir, due to evaporation, sir, like it is mostly in plants and all that, evaporation and transpiration is the main cause of cooling, sir. Sir, as we know, according to latent heat of vaporization, sir, the heat is being transferred in the form without changing the temperature. It actually takes the energy.
Very good. So when you say this evaporative cooling, water is a very fantastic molecule because it can absorb a lot of energy without itself getting heated. Very good. So that's the reason why when the water evaporates, it loses a lot of temperature. And of course, we also said that it helps the transport of elements from the root to shoot, blah, blah, blah. So those are all minor functions. Two important things that the water does are these two things. And this properties and this entire function depends on what we call as the structure of water, correct? So we said that it is bipolar structure. You have 2 atoms of hydrogen attached to one molecule of oxygen and oxygen O, and then it develops to negative charges and so on. But when you make this kind of a molecule, there is some structure that people explain that when you now have water molecule as such, water can make bonds, 2 kinds of bonds. Water molecule can make 2 kinds of bonds. Oxygen molecules will make covalent bond with 2 hydrogen atoms. So you have positive charges here and negative charges on the other side. Each of these 4 charges that you have, that is 2 positive and 2 negative charges, can make bonds with 2 more positive charges. Like let us say you have this positive charge having a van der Waals force kind of a thing which maintains some kind of an attraction between these 2 things. So you have 1 more water molecule attached to this, and 1 oxygen molecule attached to this, and 1 oxygen molecule attached to this. So in any condition, one atom of oxygen, 1 molecule of water can associate with 1, 2, 3, and 4 other molecules of water. So this structure is called the tetrahedral structure. We will come back and talk about the tetrahedral when we talk about chlorophyll also later on. But this structure that you look at will make it some kind of a rigid thing. But in, let us say, in the solid form of water, where the condensation is very high, that every molecule of water makes a bond with every other molecule, then this particular structure, the structure that you have, will be complete. But in liquid, it differs, and in the vapor, it will be still broken down into individuals. But there is something which is very unique when you look at liquid molecules. I mean, the water molecule in the liquid form, what happens is 85% of all the molecules that you have will form a tetrahedral nature structure. But 15% of them are always free. Now, there is a reason why I am telling this. We are talking about one more thing a little later now, but remember, this is important for that to remember. Okay, 15% of the water molecules are free. That means, let us say this molecule is not attached to this, is hanging around somewhere here. So you have, let us say if you make one molecule of water has 4 charges, but 4 molecules of water will have X number of charges. If you want to have this here, 1, and then this is a positive charge, this is a positive charge. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 charges are free in a tetrahedral structure. But if it is not tetrahedral, suppose if this molecule goes away, it will not be 12. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and add to the 4 more to 12. Just because one molecule of water went away from the tetrahedral, you have 4 charges or 6 charges extra, 5 charges extra. This one and the 4 charges that you have here. Imagine if 15% of them are free. This is the reason why the water molecules in both liquid and the vapor form is called the flickering cluster. Can you see that? Flickering cluster is, it flickers. You know, the molecules are not there all the time. They go, somebody comes in. And this is a dynamic process. It keeps on happening continuously. And that determines this function of that water molecule becoming a solvent. Okay. We will come back to that in 1 minute. Do you understand this, what I mean? The flickering cluster is important to tell you how much of energy is free for it to do many things. One of the most important things the water molecule does is to dissolve another compound, another solute. For that, you require energy. So you require what is called free energy for doing any work. Energy. You require free energy to do some work. Now, how do you measure the free energy and what alters the free energy? We will discuss that now. Because all the functions that he said, physiology that we talked about, we were talking about something that physiology is it biochemical or biophysical? I will show you how it is biophysical, and we will discuss about how it is biochemical and how it can be any damn thing that you have. So physiology is something that you need to understand as a whole. It actually is biology, you know, like a lot of things that are involved in it. But how does that physics help? Let us see. So if I rub this out entirely, and remember that we talked about something called free energy, and the free energy is because of the number of charges that are made available for doing some work, and that is possible only when you have the flickering cluster mechanism. All right, you understand that?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, very good. Manju, ಮಾಡಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಬೇಗ ಬೇಗ ಜೆರಾಕ್ಸ್ ಆಗುತ್ತಂತೆ ಸರ್ ಕೇಳಿ ಅವನು ಮಗು ಮಾಡಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡ ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರವೀಣ HOD ರೂಮ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ನೋಡಿ. Okay, sorry. So now what we are talking about is all these things that we said that we will function, some function will happens in a cell, and we are interested in the plant cell. Now, can anybody help me to explain a plant cell? Preetham. ಬಸವಣ್ಣಪ್ಪ ಹೇಳೋಪ. ಮಾತಾಡ್ರಲ್ಲೇ ಎಲ್ಲದಾನ. Anybody?
So it's a eukaryotic cell, which is the basic unit in any of the plants, which has a membrane-bound nucleus and the organelles, different like plastids, etc.
Okay, so she said it is the eukaryotic cell, and it has a membrane, then it has organelles. Okay. Anybody else wants to add,
Sir, it has
modify?
cell wall.
Huh?
It has cell wall.
Okay, it has cell wall. Okay, so let us see. Let us see. Okay, I'm sure you know this. The reason why I ask you this is if you know, let us go ahead because you know it. Let's not waste time on talking about it. You have a cell wall, and then you have two different types of them. What is cell wall? Cell wall is generally called the physical boundary of a cell. The physical boundary, no, like a physical barrier. But this, we have to remember this. Any boundary that we talk about is not impervious when we talk about living organisms or living cells. It is not impervious and is not completely permeous, and therefore we have to now address them in how is it that the permeability controls. But among the cell structures that you have, cell wall is permeable. It is completely permeable. It allows the water to go through and come in without any problems at all. But before we write this cell wall here, but cell wall, what is the function? Function is protect. Okay? We will come back later on. But remember, it is a protective thing. It is for anything that protects must be rigid. Correct? What I am trying to tell you is when you looked at water, the properties of water determine the function of water. And the properties of water dependent on the structure of the water molecule. Simple, isn't it? So there is something called structure function relationship in everything. We can do whatever function that we do as human beings, we do it because of our structure. We can't do what the monkeys do. We can't do what the donkeys do. I mean, that's what we do, Alva. Isn't it? That's what we do, despite the structure modification that we have. So you have a structure function relationship. If the function of the cell wall is to protect the cell from physical damages, then this must be rigid. Rigid must be something which does not easily metabolize or broken down, and it remains like that. And that is made of basically certain carbohydrates. And one of the most important component of any cell wall is cellulose. About 47% or 45% of the cell wall is composed of cellulose. Cellulose is glucose polymer, but not in your. What is the difference between starch and cellulose?
Sir, cellulose is the linear polymer of the glucose, and starch is the branched polymer of the glucose.
Okay, because you said that starch and cellulose both are polymers of glucose. But remember, starch has linear as well as branched structures. You call the linear as amylose and the branch as amylopectin. I don't know why the name they gave it as pectin. Pectin is a phenolic compound. Amylose and amylopectin are so something like that. But cellulose is also linear, but starch linear is alpha 1,4, whereas this cellulose is beta 1,4. So the glycosidic bonds are made between the two glucose. You know how to write that? You have the Fischer structure. You have CH2OH. This bond that you make here okay, so this is alpha 1,4. But for this starch, but when you now make it like beta 1,4, it becomes something like this. So the CH2OH goes up somewhere here. So that means to say glucose units are like this, and the cellulose units are turned like this. So they put it like this, and that determines whether these molecules can remain stable or not. Now, along with the cellulose, this has one more set of molecules called the hemicellulose. About 9% to 10% of the cell wall consists of hemicellulose. Cellulose is the maximum, then you have hemicellulose, and then you have a lot of other kind of things that comes in. Depending on, there are 3 types of cell walls, but not all the cells will have the same, all the 3 types. 2 types of cell walls. One is the you will have the primary wall in all meristematic cells, whereas the secondary wall is present only in the dead cells. Can you give me examples of dead cells in a living plant? Then we have the bark, the top layer that you have. The reason why the cells die, all the meristematic cells, meristematic cells are the ones that cells are dividing still. They are metabolically active, dividing. So these guys are metabolically active, therefore they're still alive. Now, what happens is the cell itself synthesizes the cell wall material and deposits them outside. So the cell wall is deposited on top of the cell, and underneath the cell wall, you have a very thin cell membrane. You know this. Okay? Now the cell wall is deposited by the cell. So whatever organelle that we discussed about how these carbohydrates are synthesized. So when you now look at this meristematic cell in the primary wall, you have the cellulose that is there inside this, and these cellulose units that you have. Now typically about 150 cellulose molecules are put in one packet, one set, and this we call as the microfibril. It's called a microfibril. So about 100 or 70 to 100 of these microfibrils will make a macrofibril. This is 150. So this will make a small thing. And those things, which means you can look at this. How do I write this? Tube-like structures. So you have, this is a macrofibril, and each inside that will have a large number of these microfibrils, and each of these microfibrils will have cellulose units. Can you see that? I mean, this is not a very beautiful diagram, but please, can you see that? Macrofibrils these guys are laid on each other in right angles, and it makes about 6 layers of macrofibrils. Imagine this. You have this macrofibril, and can you see this macrofibril? There will be one more layer of macrofibrils kept on top of them like this. That is right angles. But if you keep anything loose, but what happens in a cotton dress? You have weaving. They are not interwoven. Keep these things strong like this, then they make certain hydrogen bonds between the macrofibrils to hold them properly. I'm telling you this with a specific reason. So 2 things I told you: water, free energy. Now there is a rigidity of the cell wall. rigid. It is rigid, but it is not like metal. It is not like metal. It is some sort of a elastic material. Sorry, it is not elastic. It is little plastic. It is plastic. Is not very stretchable, but not completely rigid. Very tough. There is no doubt about it. Now these bonds that you make them keep these layers properly. That means you provide a physical structure to the cell wall, which is not very, very elastic, but it is not completely rigid, but very strong. Okay? You remember that. We'll come back to that. Then below this, you have the cell wall here. Then below that, you have the cell membrane. Cell membrane is also called dash. Cell membrane is also called dash.
Plasma
Plasma
membrane.
membrane.
Plasma membrane.
Okay. Okay, very good. Plasma, lemma, or plasma membrane, or simply the cell membrane. Okay. Now, there are several theories which people saw before. One thing is again for sure, if the cell wall is the physical boundary, cell membrane, we call it as the physiological boundary. So it defines a region where physiological processes can take place inside that or something like that, all right? Now the question that we have is, okay, we know that the function of the cell wall is to be rigid and therefore its function is protection. And we'll come back to one more very, very important thing, which I call as turgidity. I'll give you that word, but we'll come back to this later on. To help the plant cell to be functionally capable, cell wall is extremely important. We'll come back to that. But if that is the function of this, it all depends on the composition. Therefore, if the cell membrane has to define a boundary inside which only the physiological things can happen, and if that is the major function, then that also should depend on its composition. For a very long time, people thought that a membrane is a bilayer. The reason why it was called a bilayer is because it has two layers. With the discovery of the electron microscope, they saw that there was an electron dense region and an electron light region of a membrane. When you cut it open this much, put it under an electron microscope, magnified a million times, and see, they saw that there was a dense region and then there was another dense region, but there was a light region here. There was nothing there. So people thought it was a bilayer, the two layers. But it took them some time to understand that it is not just the light region and the dense region, but it is because of the composition. There are two very important things that are there inside. One is called the phospholipids. And the other group is called proteins. Then they explained it and said, okay, the membrane is not just like this, it is a protein lipid bilayer. I think two guys, Daniel and the Dawson, they said that this structure remains uniformly all over the cell, and therefore they call this bilayer as unit structure. Are you following me, Makle? Are you following me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So they call it a unit structure. Now, but people agreed at that time that it is a phospholipid and proteins that make this particular cell as its predominant compositional molecule that you have in the membranes are phospholipids and proteins. And the bilayer remains entire place in the cell, and the entire place of the cell membrane is like this. Then there were questions. Okay, if this is the function, I mean, this is the composition, and this is the structure, what is its function? The function was amazing. They all knew that the membrane can be, or any structure can be either permeable or impermeable. Alva? That is, you allow or you don't allow. You listen or you don't listen. You understand, you don't understand. But there is always something in between. It is not that I don't understand, but I don't understand completely. It's not that I don't listen. I did not listen completely. But that's not all. Now what happens? If I have permeability, can you see this part of the board, Bakla?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So when I look at impermeable, forget about it. It is permeable, we know. So don't worry about these impermeable structures, which is not there at all in any organism, any living organism. So if you look at the permeability, there are two things. One, it allows certain molecules and certain allow certain and certain other do not allow. This is what any typical membrane will be, any filter will be. This membrane or this property is called semi-permeable. They must have told you in school. Cell membrane allows the movement of water, but not solute. Yes. Yes, sir. No. Yes, sir. No. Ankit.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Very good. Okay. Oh, I think it takes some time before you hear an answer. Okay. I think I'm impatient. So now what happens if it is semi-permeable, it will allow the water to move in, but not the solute molecules. Then people thought, oh my, this cannot be possible because you said it is a unit structure, and everywhere you have the protein and the phospholipids. They wanted to go back and understand the protein membrane structure a little more. Then they understood proteins are. So this central portion which you saw as the electron light region is the phospholipid. Lipid, waxes, oils, these lipids are hydrophobic. So if there is a layer which is hydrophobic, how did it allow water to go in at all? It should not have been permeable to water because there's a hydrophobic layer. Then they said, oh gosh, this cannot be possible because the unit structure that Daniel and Dawson called it as in the 1950s or 1940s may not be the right way to explain this. Then came in 1973, Singer and Nicholson. These names I don't care, but it is nice to remember these are the old people who did so many things. But in the exam, somebody will ask you dash and dash. I hate those things, but nevertheless. Singer and Nicholson came and said certain things. They said that the lipid bilayer is correct. There's a protein, there's phospholipid, there are other things correct. And they're arranged in some particular fashion is also correct. But the only thing that they said is this arrangement called the unit structure is not common, not uniform all over the place. It is very highly randomized. Therefore, they called it as a mosaic. You know what's a mosaic? Excuse me, just a second. Huh? Good evening, sir. Ah, huh? Okay. Oh, yes, sir. Okay. Oh, By the end of this year will be fine. By this March, no chance. No, next March, yes. Oh yeah, please. uh, yes, sir. Because by before March, if it, see, you have released it in the financial year this year, no, that is 2021-22. Because the next will be 22-23. So this is 21-22. Then the next year will correct. So the next release will be 22-23. Will be December 2022. March 22 March. Next 2 months law. 23 March. Before 23 March, we need the money. So that means January, February 2023. Or Shubhradu release chesara. Oh, very nice. Oh, it is also with you then. Oh, very good, very nice. Yeah, I know. I know, my God. I sent that half one paragraph of something. Is that okay, sir? Or do you? Okay. Anji, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, Maglai, this is how I get stuck with all this meeting. This is a call from what is called the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. Okay. I'm sorry, I keep doing these things. So pardon me when we digress. Okay. So what is it that we were talking about? I said that this particular structure its composition is correct. It has lipids, it has phospholipids, it has proteins, correct? And they are also arranged in some fashion, correct? But then they said it is a mosaic. This structure is not uniform all over the membrane. This is a wonderful discovery by these guys. So these guys came and said, and one more thing that was beautiful is that like any other structure, a membrane is not rigid at all. This is very fluid. Therefore, these guys named the membrane, which is even today people are using it as a fluid mosaic structure. You understand that?
Yes, sir.
Harshita. Okay. So you have the fluid mosaic structure, which helps, which if I write that membrane somewhere here, this membrane would have you have the phospholipids, you have the protein, this is the protein, and the phospholipids here, and you have something like this. This is the unit structure that we said. But at certain times, they said it has 3 different types of proteins. They said that there are certain proteins which are not connected with the phospholipid, they're sitting on top, or they are sitting on the inner part, or they may be sitting somewhere inside, or some of the proteins can be like this. Can you see that there are 3 different things? These are external proteins. These are called as internal proteins, and these are extremely important for you to remember. These they call it as integral proteins. Nowadays, we don't call them integral, we call them transmembrane proteins. These transmembrane proteins, the external and the internal, they revolutionized our understanding of an important thing. Now, these internal proteins and the external proteins and the transmembrane protein, they can do a number of functions. They are ion carriers, B, electron carriers. Okay? These are also a stagnant and they can be very highly mobile. They are very dynamic. This, again, as I said, changed our perception of how a membrane can function. The reason is, we said that it is a permeable membrane. And we said it allows the movement of water and not the other molecule. We call it as a semi-permeable membrane. Correct? Just now. Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. But what happens in a living cell is, cell says, hey, look here, I don't want water. Send it out. Okay. I don't allow the water to come in when I don't want. I allow the water to go out when I don't want water excess in my body. That is easy. But what is more important is, I want potassium. I want protein. I want sugar. Or I want amino acids. I want something else. And at the same time, I have made something. Send it out. I don't want it. It has to go out. Which means I need to have a membrane which is very intelligent in the sense that it allows whatever has to come inside or whatever has to go out of the cell at any time, designed they are therefore called selectively permeable. Selectively permeable, sometimes they are also called as differentially permeable. You follow that? As I said, that you can be ion carriers or electron carriers, or they can also be something like the integral protein. They are molecule transporters. They are like protein that can be taken and kept anywhere they want. They can be also channels. There are a large number of these things which have been discovered now. There is a channel which allows the movement of water called Aquaporin. You have transporters like plastoquinone. You have electron carriers, large number of them, called cytochromes. Or you have plastocyanine. And you have a large number of ion carriers like sodium H plus exporter. NHX is a very beautiful carrier. And there are two types of these carriers. So we will come back to that when we talk about the movement of these molecules later on. But remember that very highly mosaic, very random, very irregular, but then they do a fantastic function when it comes to the plant's performance. And of course, you have, will not go into the depths of field, all these things, you know, but there's a centrally placed large vacuole, and then you have some extensions called endoplasmic reticulum. And these endoplasmic reticula that you have are also the nucleus and the chloroplast and the mitochondria and all these other kind of organelles that one of you said is present in the cell, which makes it to completely function. Mitochondria and the chloroplast we'll discuss when we talk about the carbon metabolism. We'll talk about the ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, and we talk about the nitrogen metabolism, and we will talk about the other kind of organelles whenever we want something to be discussed. Okay. Now, one of the major things I said is that it is a membrane which is selectively permeable or differentially permeable, and then you have a cell wall which is rigid. Now, what happens is, how did I say that this helps in the function of everything? Is when water enters in. When the water is moving in, it can either go to the vacuole or stay in the cytosol. But the moment it goes to the vacuole expands. When vacuole expands, it pushes the cell membrane, and the cell membrane pushes the cell wall. If everybody is membrane is pushing the cell wall. The cell wall says, okay, kachak. Then it will say, no more. Shut up, stay there. Then it will push it back. Now, when the cell wall exerts an equal and opposite pressure, and if this equal and opposite pressure is maximum, then it is called turgid. You have two forces. You have the wall pressure, and then the other one is called the osmotic pressure. I will tell you that a little while later when we talk about this. But remember that the cell membrane that protects the system helps in maintaining turgidity. And only when the plant cell is turgid, it can function normally. Otherwise, it is just not possible. That I want you to remember very clearly. And all these things are possible only because you have the membrane, we have the structure function relationship, and this structure function relationship depends on the composition of these structures. All right. So, okay. I have a meeting starting in another 5 more minutes. You have anything to ask me? Next class tomorrow, when we meet at 2 o'clock, we'll discuss more about how each of these functions are different from one another. All right. Okay. As I said, that we should keep some 5 minutes for some interactions. Ayaz, Shaji.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Tell me something, my dear boy.
About the class.
I don't care about what you want to talk about. New York, also go ahead. About the class, yes, first.
We learned about the functions of the cell membrane and cell wall.
Mhm.
How it is helping in the transportation of materials in and out.
Very good. So is a cell membrane semi-permeable or permeable, impermeable or selectively permeable?
It is selectively permeable.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Is there anything that you want to ask? Please
No.
remember this. Go ahead. I ask.
No, nothing else.
You have to ask. I'll tell you why. If you do not ask, I may not tell you at all. I'll think that you are dumb people. But you are very nice. You are very brilliant. You have been understanding very well and you are reciprocating very, very well. I'm really happy about this batch. I'm very good. I'm very happy. You are very good. Therefore, what is important is, see, we are all trained to answer. Don't worry about answering. If there is an opportunity, I will not even conduct exams for you. I don't care about your exams. But what I care is knowledge. And the knowledge can come only when you seek. Therefore, you should ask. Don't hesitate, Makle. Please, don't hesitate. And don't hesitate with anybody. Anybody. Don't even worry. If somebody says, oh, you're not supposed to ask, that's not possible. You should ask. Okay, it is also possible that you will ask questions a little later, isn't it? You don't have to have a question for every class. Is it, Adarsh?
Yes, sir. Sir, is there any difference between semi-permeable and selective permeable?
Yes, there is a lot of difference. Can anybody tell? Semi-permeable and selectively permeable are very different permeabilities. Who can answer this question that Adarsh has asked?
So that you told today only that that the semi-permeable generally has since it was in the unit structure, it was told that only water is allowed to pass and other solids can't be passed out. So it offers resistance, but it later was disclosed that it can allow some solutes, proteins, and etc. to pass through. That's the difference. That in some solutes are also passing, sir. That is selectively permeable, sir.
Adarsh, you accept that whatever Ankita said? Do you agree? Do you agree or not?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. To become best friends in life, in your life career, everywhere, you should disagree. I will disagree with what Ankita said because I want to be friends with all of you. You know why? She said that it will allow water molecule and all that. But what is important is water, I mean, all the other substances, ions and molecules or anything is allowed or disallowed depending on the requirement of the cell. If something that comes in now doesn't mean it will come in all the time. It can be stopped. That something comes in cannot be sent out is not possible. It can be thrown out whenever the cell doesn't want it. So it's an amazing system that you have, which is called a cell membrane. Plasma membrane, you should go to the library and read. There's a huge book on membranes, series of them. I mean, that so much of information is already known about these membranes. And it is an amazing thing to learn about it. Good, you asked. Good, Ankita, you said. Anything, anybody else?
So, so today you
Arun.
told that after seeing that structure in the microscope that it was looking like a bilayer, they named it unit structure, sir. So why like that only, sir?
Because see, the lipid is transparent to laser when compared to the proteins. So when electrons are when electron microscope puts some laser on electrons and then picks up what is coming from there and then makes the structure. So when they saw that electron microscope image, the transparent part, which consisted of the phospholipids, showed as if there was nothing there, and they called it as a light region. This was the unit structure before 1940s. But nowadays we don't call them at all because we know what it is. So it's a very fluid structure. And I mean, much better systems are available now. You have confocal microscopy, you have laser desorption microscopies. There are a lot of fantastic mechanisms that are available these days to see. Our university used to have an electron microscope, but it never worked at all for a long, long time. And the professor who was taking care of that also passed away, so that's it. It used to be there in the veterinary science college when we were all together. Those days when I was your age, Ankita. But what your question is very correct, that these electrons, gents and electron light regions, are what the electron microscope observed. So this is what we thought would be the case. But then when we had better mechanisms to see the membrane through the microscopy, then the other analysis came. That's why science should be very dynamic. You never know, after another 10 years, somebody can come and say, this fluid mosaic structure is also stupid. There's something which is much better. Who knows? That will be the fun. That is how it should be. Okay. Did I answer your question, Ankita beta?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thanks, sir.
Okay. Anybody?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in the beginning, you were saying about the tetrahedron structure of water molecule.
Mhm.
In that, why the 15% of the molecules would disjoint, sir?
Wow, very good. Excellent question that is. Wish I knew better. See, it is something that they all are together. But see, when all these things, Mike explained it to me when I asked him the same question. We always have a flickering mind. We agree sometimes, we disagree sometimes, and all those things. But what happens in these molecules is the structure that you make, it's always dynamic. There is always something that is forcing them to leave and go. For example, when you are heating it, the temperature itself is a force. So as the temperature increases, more and more water molecules will leave one another and go, because the energy that it is being pushed into will make their bond to become broken. In the sense, the weakest bond between two molecules is called the van der Waals forces. You agree? There's an electrostatic bond, there's a van der Waals force, then there's a hydrogen bond, then the covalent bond in the increasing order of their strength of holding. Covalent bonding is very difficult to break. You need some mechanism of oxidation and reduction. Those are all chemistry. But van der Waals force is a physical force. So you can break it by physical input of certain energy. And this energy is always changing. Suppose you have one bottle of water and you keep it at room temperature. And if you have a very sensitive thermometer, you can measure the temperature will be very different at various places in the bottle in the same volume. So therefore, this pressure that you have, the external force that you have, which is providing energy to the molecule, to the set of, the volume of water. In van der Waals forces with other molecules of water, will leave and go. That's why it is flickering. It is flickering. Why 15%? Wow, I don't know. This is an averaged out thing. It is an averaged out thing. It is 15%. It can be different. It can be very different.
Thank you.
All right, Dilip. Okay, Maklay. So hope to see you tomorrow. All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, Gavi.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, everybody.